doubting that these lesser conferences should have the ability to play against these top teams and be considered a top team themselves. Yo, this is Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. I'm back at it with you today, and as you can see from the backdrop, I'm back in the kitchen. Why am I in the kitchen? Why was I in the kitchen in previous episodes? Because I'm cooking it up for you all, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, boxing, other sports under the umbrella. We're going to get to it, and we're going to have as much fun as possible. Before we have any fun, by the way, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, share. This is for all kinds of sports fans. So get with that, get with the program, help us out with the algorithm. Let's try to get 1,000 subscribers. I know it's going to take some work, but I'm willing to put in the work. You're here because you saw the thumbnail. That thumbnail talks about the Gonzaga Bulldogs, baby. They lost in conference, which is something that doesn't happen very often. They lost to St. Mary's in the West Coast Conference. St. Mary's was number 23 in the country, so they've been doing something in that small conference. They won by 10 points. Ironically, going into the game, they were a 10.5-point underdog, but you would expect that. The reason why? Gonzaga had a 7-game winning streak against St. Mary's. Not only that, Gonzaga themselves were on a 17-game winning streak. So there was a lot to go on going into that game. And typically, Gonzaga wins all of the time in the West Coast Conference. And incredibly, there were 6 other teams that were ranked who lost on the same day. And this is just the week before conference tournaments start. So this is ridiculous, and it's going to be something that we all look at as college basketball fans, but because it's bigger than just college basketball, just as sports fans, we're going to see how it goes down. And St. Mary's being number 23 right now, they were able to fight off at home and go undefeated at home against Gonzaga. But don't fret for Gonzaga, they're undefeated at home as well. Their problems happened on the road as they picked up their 3rd loss. What's going on this college basketball season? Number one is like unsteady. So unsteady is the head that wears the crown, not only in the West Coast Conference, but overall, because we saw Gonzaga just a few months ago playing against Baylor in the championship game. Now, they didn't win. It was a big blowout, but nevertheless, Gonzaga seems to be here all of the time. And ironically, that brings up one of my other points. Gonzaga plays in the West Coast Conference. If you keep up with any of the West Coast Conference basketball games, you would see that virtually every year, there's like a triumvirate of teams that play one another in a round robin, and the conference is going to be decided by one of those 3 teams. Most likely Gonzaga, who's the most dominant, the alpha basketball team of the 3 teams. Those 3 teams is, of course, Gonzaga being the number 1. Number 2 and number 3, they fight for it all the time. So it's St. Mary's, as we just saw against Gonzaga. And then it's San Francisco, the alma mater of Bill Russell. So we see the West Coast Conference isn't that tough a conference. So why does Gonzaga always get the benefit of the doubt and gets highly ranked before the season started? They were number 1. Not because they lost in the championship last year. They've been getting these nods and benefit of the doubt for years now. And I know they've put in their work, but when it comes and shows and proves, when games matter, which is championship games or just tournament games, they don't pull it off. So I'm thinking it has a lot to do with their conference. I'm doubting that these lesser conferences should have the ability to play against these top teams and be considered a top team themselves. Now, Gonzaga hasn't won a championship, but they've been consistent and they've planned their plan of attack very carefully, and they've done it intelligently. They get the big name teams in the beginning of the season, the teams that have high turnover more times than not, they play them with most times their third and fourth year players. They beat those teams early on. They hang on to the momentum, and then they go into a conference play where they play these lesser teams. Now, the disappointing part of this equation is this. BYU, I was expecting to come into the West Coast Conference and do some damage. You know, they came from a bigger conference, coming from the WAC and then the Mountain West. And then in 2011, they came into the West Coast Conference, and they haven't done much of anything. Nothing at all. This is the school of Sean Bradley. This is the school of Jimmy Fredette. So what happened? BYU, by the way, will not be with the West Coast Conference after the 22-23 season. They will be heading into the Big 12, which has problems of its own. But not only that, the football team of BYU and basketball team and other sports will benefit from being there, because I understand it is a business move for both schools. But going back to Gonzaga, what do you think about Gonzaga being the top dog virtually every year when they don't have much competition? You know, you have other conferences out there, the major conferences. You have the SEC out there. You have the ACC, the Big East, the Big 10, the Big 12. And these teams have to battle like fiercely almost all season long, because they do their out-of-conference tournament, and then they come into their own conference play, and they're battling one another, which have very good teams. Gonzaga doesn't have to do that. They cherry pick the teams they want to play in the non-conference schedule, and they pull it off most times, because a lot of these teams with high turnover, they don't have the continuity until later on in the season, and that's when they're more formidable. So a team that's older, which Gonzaga typically is, because they do not have as much turnover as these traditional powerhouses, they beat them and they ride the wave, as I mentioned earlier, to the NCAA tournament. But that also leads, they get a higher seed, and then they don't play the top competition until later on, when they have to play the top competition in the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8, and ultimately in the Final Four and championship games, and they have not delivered because of it. Chet Holmgren, the top player in high school basketball just last season, he had a pretty bad day, 6.6 rebounds. That's not exactly the day. He had block shots. I believe he had 3 or 4 block shots. But Chet Holmgren, he's been battling it out with Paolo Banchero from Duke, who's also considered a top player. In fact, he's even a top NBA prospect right now, maybe #1 overall when the draft comes about. But nevertheless, Chet Holmgren really didn't put down the game he needed to put down on the road against obviously his biggest threat in the conference, and his team lost because of it. I know he's not the only player on that team, but this is Gonzaga, man. They're getting some top flight athletes these days. They may not be getting the consistent flow of 5-star players, but Mark Few and his guys have shown that they are the few and the proud. They're not Marines, but they're the few and the proud, and they've been doing it for years and decades now, dominating the West Coast Conference, having opportunities to do well in the NCAA tournament. And by the way, how many times is the #1 slot going to change? Every other week, or almost multiple times in a week, we're watching students storm the court because they're beating a #1 team. The latest #1 team goes down, kids storm the court. In fact, you have kids storming the court for #2 teams. They're beating #2 teams, and they're still storming the court. Anyway, let me know what you think about this little blurb I've given you in about 10 minutes or less, maybe a little bit more. But this is Trav, and this is Yo Trav Sports Bag. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you give us the thumbs up. We need help with this algorithm. Come help a brother out. I will be dropping more as time goes on, as big as the stories can get. Football, baseball, basketball, maybe a little hockey, maybe some tennis. It's all about sports. Join the Sports Bag. Catch you next time.